this is Alcan. Welcome back to my channel. Something interesting came up. Okay. Before then, a little update on the George Floyd situation. Apparently, People Magazine has reported there was a situation where, in fact, both George Floyd and the officer who murdered him had an uneven relationship when they were working security at a nightclub, which unfortunately got burned down during the riots. Thanks a lot, guys. You're making it harder to find these witnesses now. We need them. According to the club owner, George Floyd was complaining about the officer because he was not treating the patrons right. Apparently, the guy has a history of problems with the African American community, and the majority of the patrons in that club were African American. So, this is an interesting development that probably would explain how his knee ended up on George Floyd's neck. It's a personal thing. Unfortunately, his personal thing has caused so much chaos in the country right now. I don't know what to tell you, but if it was racism, he won the gold medal for that once. Locked and sold it. Dumbass. That's what I have to say about the defendant. Now to the main story. Speaking of racism, did racism play a role in the decision in 1991 to force TW Local 100's Union President Sonny Hall to give up random drug testing to the New York City Transit Authority? The year was 1991. Race relations in New York City was in the toilet. And what I mean by the toilet, it's everything from the Central Park Jogger 5 to the Crown Heights riots. Relationships were pretty bad. The Ed Koch years were not very kind to African American communities. And despite the effort to elect the first black mayor, David Dinkins, unfortunately, it wasn't working out. It's not his fault, but the powers that be doesn't seem to care. So on the night of August 28, 1991, a 10-car train made of R62s from Kawasaki, the first Japanese-built subway cars for New York City Transit, left Woodlawn train station, heading for New Lots Avenue in Brooklyn. In control was a motorman named Robert Ray, and he is conductor. A couple of times in the Bronx, the train ran out of the station. The number 4 trains had on this line, the brand new cars had a history of running out of stations before. So, even though they put a governor on it to reduce the speeds, it still could possibly happen. After missing the first 3 or 4 stops, conductor spoke to him. Everything seemed to be working out fine. The train left Grand Central Station, and that's where the mystery occurred. Around 14th Street, Union Square. I said a lot of protests in New York City these days. The train was switching tracks at a high rate of speed, around 45 miles per hour, derailed. The train came apart violently as it was colliding with itself and the wall, 4 blocks from the train station. 5 people were killed, many injuries, and there's a speculation where the motorman was drunk. Of course, that was the least of the problems. In the motorman's cab, they also found a cracked vial. And this is where I question whether this was racism involved, because the fact is, yes, there was a crack epidemic happening at the time. For those who do not know or familiar with New York City transit subway trains at the time, the last car of every train is called the party car because everybody goes there to do their thing. And yes, they're smoking weed and all that stuff. I know, I witnessed it. No, but I didn't rat nobody out. Sorry. Anyway, apparently one of these party goers might have kicked the crack vial underneath the cab. And it's not unusual because I find crack vials in my cab a lot too during that time period. So people were kicking it so the police wouldn't catch them with it. But then again, they can't be prosecuted if the crack is not in the vial, is it? They didn't know that. Anyway, so after the accident, while they were still looking for him, and the debate was, of course, random drug testing. TWU Local 100 for years has successfully stopped random drug testing from coming onto the New York City Transit Authority property, meaning that the majority of the people operating subway and buses are African American and other minorities. So, like I said, they took advantage because they found the crack vial. They forced the union president, who was white by the way, to give in and give them the random drug testing with no safeguards whatsoever for the employees in return. Now you're saying, oh, they found the crack vial, that automatically he was on crack, right? Well, the problem was when the drug test came back, he didn't test positive for crack. Alcohol, but he was out for 13 hours. So we were still searching for him in the city while people were being rescued from the train. So I don't know why they would say this is a positive when he wasn't in the cab drunk at that time that when they caught him. This is 13 hours. So question is, did racism play a role in forcing the union to accept random drug testing? That's a very interesting subject. After all, this is not the first time African American has been railroaded in this city. Sean Bell, they tried to railroad him. Other people they had tried to railroad. Of course, Sean Bell was a young man who was about to get married the next day. He was at a bachelor party for him. Left the club. And same time, somebody had a gun, but it wasn't in Sean Bell's party. That was a separate situation. But somehow, the undercover people over there screwed the whole thing up. So, instead of following the person who did have the gun, which, by the way, they never found the person or that gun, somehow they thought Sean Bell and his friends were involved. When they tried to stop Sean Bell, and since he didn't know they were undercover, he tried to keep going, but unfortunately, shots were fired at the car. He was killed. His friends were injured. It was a wild shooting. In fact, one bullet hit the glass of the air train station nearby, shattering it, almost hitting a passenger or the two Port Authority police over there. One of them almost got hit. That officer was fired, but I'm not sure about the discipline action was taken against the others. But we know that somebody screwed up. Anyway, his future wife did end up marrying him afterwards, even though he had died. In a legal matter. She ran for city council and won. And she did try to change the laws regarding police matters. But as you may know now that the specific law that shield police records is just days away of being signed away by the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. But again, New York City Transit gets away with murder. Because quite frankly, do I really think that Robert Ray was drunk when he was operating? No. The drug test was taken 13 hours after the incident. So my conclusion is he wasn't sleeping well that day. So he might have had a problem sleeping. He only had 2 hours of sleep. At that time, around the country, the railroads were taking actions against sleeping disorders, but New York City Transit, not being a railroad, was exempt from it. So it took a long time before the agency finally caught up with a sleeping policy, but at the expense of everybody else. They got random drug testing, but it's a double-edged sword. Because now we have legalized marijuana in New York and other places. The Federal Transit Administration last year decided to increase the number of people tested for drugs. So that's a bigger expense for New York City Transit. Well, that's what you wanted. Now you stuck with it. But the fact is, unfortunately, those 5 people that died, they died in vain because all the recommendations that were suggested by the National Transit Safety Board, majority of them were ignored. There was internal fighting between the departments in New York City Transit, and it wasn't until another accident that they were forced to implement these changes. So this is Al Can saying so long for now, and don't forget to stop. Some of these management people in New York City Transit missed their stop a long time ago. They should have never been there in the first place. Take care. Okay, this is Al Can. The video about this present is a little controversial, and I do want to point out when it was on trial, the district attorney had a problem prosecuting the case because no witnesses came forward saying that he was drunk. Not the cab driver brought him to work, not the dispatcher let him sign on here on the train, not the conductor that was working with him. By the way, the conductor had to resign after the accident, and not the police officers that banged into him on 14th Street Union Square. In fact, he started drinking after he left the station. According to Ray, own words. So, said if he had been stopped and he tested after the accident right away, most likely he would not test positive for the alcohol. But unfortunately, racism may have played a role in this accident. So all I can say is watch the video and leave some comments. I can take care. Bye.